record. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Bob Unger Show. And this fine morning, we have a fine woman who is a fine attorney, and her name is Tricia Lindsay. And I first met Tricia last week in Ronkonkoma, Long Island, where there were a bunch of people that are objecting to being slaves. They haven't realized yet in this country that the Emancipation Proclamation was a long time ago, and we are not slaves of the government. They're supposed to be our slaves, if nothing else. So Tricia, tell me a little bit about your background and how you got to the point where you're at now.
Oh, wow. Okay, so I am a former educator of 24 years. I began in the Catholic school system, then transferred into the public school system where I thought there was a greater need for teachers, good teachers and teachers that look like me to set an example for children in the Bronx, New York. And so I taught in public school for, wow, most of my career. I think it was maybe 17 of those years. Started in New York City, ended in Yonkers, New York. And while I was an educator for a number of years, I would say, oh, I'm gonna go to Congress. You're gonna see me testifying at Congress for education because of policy and what I saw happening within the education system, the disparities between neighborhoods and amongst certain classes of people. And then throughout the years, I would just continue to just make observations. I started noticing an increase in emotional disabilities with children, physical disabilities, number of children being pushed into special ed, special needs classes that I did not think needed to be there. I watched as education differed greatly from one building to the next, even within the same district or within a certain perimeter of number of blocks. And then I started to see the decline in education and started to just advocate in that respect. I became more in touch with, there was a need for me to speak to more community leaders. And then I had children that I had to advocate for within the criminal justice system that had contacts with the criminal justice system because of just certain situations that were going on. And then finally, I said to a colleague of mine, there's an experiment going on. And she would say, what are you talking about? And I said this for a number of years. I said, because something has changed from the time that I started as an educator to now. And this was maybe a few years before I started law school, a number of years. And I said, there's something in the food, there's something in the water, there's something happening. And I'm promising you that there's someone right now that's taking notes and jotting down the results of this experiment based upon what I'm seeing. More kids are graduating school, not being able to read, not being able to write, math skills are low. And I said, these kids are ending up in the criminal justice system. And so for me, that's when the school to prison pipeline became very obvious. And over the years, I just kept watching, but I did not want to leave because I felt like myself, that what I brought to education was, I wasn't the only one, but I knew I was unique because I served the whole child, and what I addressed with the children, addressed their social needs, their familial needs, their educational needs, and I wore the hats proudly. It was tiring, but I wore it proudly, and I felt like the children needed me. But then I got to a point where I said, there's only but so much I can do for my classroom. I went and I received, I have 4 degrees. So I received a degree in secondary science and in school building administration. And I have an extension in school district leadership. And so I thought at one point, maybe being a superintendent would be the answer, but then you're still working in the same system, right? And so I said, that's not gonna help because you can't eat and whatever in the same place. Right? I can't go against the institution that's feeding me. And so in my mind, I had to get out of the education system in order to attack it from within, in order to attack it from the outside, or to help to make the changes that I thought were necessary. With that, I saw the disparities within the criminal justice system as well, and felt that I had to do something alongside of that. Watching children fall prey to the criminal justice system, watching the disparities with sentencing amongst people of color versus their white counterparts. And so I wanted to get into, one of my goals with entering the field of law was to deal with those disparities as well. And so,
By the way, not to interrupt you, but one of my colleagues in the area of education, because I've been involved in that for a long time, besides being a lawyer, is a guy named Robert Sweet, who at one time was top aide to Ronald Reagan. And he wrote a paper on the link between crime and the way they misteach reading. He, in this paper, which you can get if you go online, you can get it, Robert Sweet, S-W-E-E-T, Jr. You also might want to read Dr. Thomas Sowell's book, which is called Inside American Education. And then you might want to read another book, which you could even get online. It's called The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America. And the word is deliberate. And that you can get just by going to deliberatedumbingdown.com. And then my friend Alex Newman and my friend who passed away, Dr. Samuel Blumenfeld, wrote a book that just came out a year ago. It is called Crimes of the Educators. And they literally prove in the book, from the words of the people they are accusing. In law, they taught us that's called an admission against interest.
absolutely.
That person's own words against them. They prove that this was planned over 100 years ago, and that they would put a whole word method of reading, also called whole language or look-say, and they would take out the way the founding fathers were taught to read, and they would dumb this country down. In fact, Bill Clinton had this little midget that was his Secretary of Labor, Robert Reich. He had a beard, a little guy. And Robert Reich's assistant Secretary of Labor was Dr. Thomas, T-H-O-M-A-S, Stitch, S-T-I-C-H-T. And the Washington Post reprinted a speech that Thomas Stitch gave. This is like 20 years ago. And here's what he said. And I can almost paraphrase it perfectly and maybe get close to the exact words. He said, "We do not want a highly literate population. What we want is a manageable workforce, although an elite cadre of highly educated and innovative people is necessary for creating change. But changing attitudes and feelings is more important than learning how to read. In other words, we want a bunch of rats that will all run together with the captain of the ship as the rats are jumping off, really controlling the whole situation." And so they put the kids on Ritalin, and they say they're learning disabled, when in fact, these same kids, because, I didn't grow up, I live in Great Neck now, but I didn't grow up in Great Neck. I grew up on Amsterdam Avenue in the #1 murder precinct in New York City, 34,
Wow.
right near where Malcolm X was killed.
Wow. Okay.
By
Yes.
the Audubon Ballroom.
Yes. Yes.
And I lived there for 25 years until I became a lawyer and I could finally afford. And you know what? I was better off there, to tell you the truth. But I didn't know that, because in those days I was so ignorant that I thought if you owned a Cadillac, you were a billionaire. I didn't realize that half these people were sleeping in their Cadillacs.
The facade that's created, right?
Oh, man. So, they call that big hat, but no cows.
Wow. I like
That's
that.
a Texas expression.
Okay.
It's true. When you take a look at
Yeah, I like that.
there's a great book called The Millionaire Next Door. What a great book. And that really inspired me because the guy studied millionaires across the country for years, and they are not who you think they are.
Mm.
There is some Italian guy that's living in Maspeth, Queens, in a 2-family house, and he's a plumber, but he's not a show-off. And so he doesn't have bling on him. He's just a humble guy that walks around in jeans, and he drives a 20 years old. And meanwhile, he owns 4 houses. You know, he's getting like, I mean, this is the way it really is. All this show-off nonsense is just a bunch of crap.
Right. Absolutely.
Because you know what it's, you know, I'm not a Christian, but Jesus said, what profit a man if he gained the world but lose his soul in the process? And, you know, those words happen to be true. You know,
absolutely.
When you worship and you do idol worship and you worship material things, you're in trouble already. And this is
absolutely.
Problem. The Jewish people have an expression which I think the Christians know also. The fear of God is the beginning of all wisdom.
Yes. Yes.
Love and fear. You know,
yes.
I love my father, but let me tell you, I was afraid of my father.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I didn't tell him what to do like the kids of today. He told me what to do, and I didn't want to get my butt kicked by him. And so I learned love, but I learned fear, and I learned respect. Today, as you probably notice, the parents are afraid of their own kids.
Yes, they are.
So I didn't mean to interrupt, but go ahead.
It's okay. No, not a problem, because you're the quote from Thomas Stitch, I believe you said it was Thomas Stitch that said that we don't want a highly literate. It just solidifies what I've been saying, because when I speak, depending on, you know, what comes to mind when I'm speaking, but I've made the statement that all the institutions are in bed together. I said, I think I made this speech in Connecticut. And I said, don't believe that one institution is separate from the other. The educational system is in bed with the criminal justice system, is in bed with what's going on right now with COVID. I said, this was planned years ago, and we're just seeing all the pieces of the puzzle coming together right now. I said, when they brought in state testing, I said, that was another level of the plan being implemented, where teachers moved away from teaching analysis and thought processes. And when I taught, I used the, the Socratic method. I asked questions more than I lectured. There were times, of course, when I had to just give information, but I taught kids how to think, because they were not being taught how to think. And I said, the reason why I was so successful with my standardized testing was because I taught the children how to take the test, but I taught them how to think through a process. And I said, if you can think and analyze a question, and analyze the answers and choices that are given to you, and have a thought process, you will succeed, because you can have the information but not be able to take this test. And if you cannot think through it, you can still fail, you know. And so my emphasis in my science classrooms, because I taught biology, living environment, earth science, I was a science teacher. I said, you can have the knowledge, but you need the thought processes. You need the analysis. And when children came to me in the 7th and 8th grade, and even in high school, I taught high school primarily during summer school, but I stayed within the middle school section, because that's the boot camp of education, and every teacher is not cut out for that, but it was my favorite group. And it was the most neglected, I thought, group of children, because they're difficult to deal with. And I knew that I had to get them at the end of their elementary period, just when they were maturing into teenagers, so to set the stage for their high school years, so that they could enter and become young adults, successful young adults, and going on to be successful adults. But I saw it where the kids were being, I had children in my classroom that were slated as special needs, and even autistic children, that I would teach them. I would act like they were normal children. I didn't act like they had this disability. I recognized it and I was aware of it. But what I recognized more so than anything is that even the mainstream student learned differently. Every child learns differently. Some are auditory, some are visual, some are tactile. There's just different ways. And so in my classroom, I approached all my lessons from that standpoint. So I didn't need to necessarily differentiate so much to address the needs and to highlight that child in the class that had that need, because all children needed versatile, a variety of
Multi-sensory.
Exactly. Thank you.
Yeah.
They all multisensory, and they needed a diverse approach to learning.
What was the name of the Black woman, very famous in Chicago? Cicely Tyson, the Black actress, very good actress.
Yes.
Our part in a movie about her. There's a book about her called The Magic Feather. And in that book, it tells the story of an autistic kid that was going nowhere in all the schools he was in and getting worse and worse. And this white family went to this Black educator. I can't remember her name. I'm getting old. It's early.
Oh, it's just a lot going on.
and they came to her, and she taught the kid intensive systematic phonics. And in the book, you'll see that the kid winds up being perfectly normal. And if you go to the most widely used book for 100 years in America, before the government schools took over, it's called McGuffey's Reader. I have the 1828 McGuffey's Reader, 1828. And if you look at the 4th grade McGuffey's Reader, it's called the 4th Reader. The reading level of kids in those days was above lawyers of today. That's how far I'm going with what I'm saying.
Listen, my daughter belonged to this program called the African Genesis Program. And it's similar to what students of with Greek backgrounds, when they go to school to learn about their culture and their history, similar
Right.
to children of other backgrounds. And so she went to it was a course of over 2 years, and she learned about her history, starting from Africa and then coming to the shores of America, as opposed to starting it on the shores of America and being taught that she was a slave. So it built on the history. And within this curriculum, there were 5 trips. And the trip started down south and trailed the Underground Railroad up to Canada. And the final trip is actually to Africa. And that's an amazing trip. But the trip in Canada was so amazing because we came out, we were actually able to walk the path, the last part of the trail, the Underground Railroad. And we came out to this home and this schoolhouse that was within feet of the house. And we found out that this was where slaves would go and attend school, and the adult slaves, now freed slaves, free people, would attend school with their children because, of course, they were not educated. And they had samples of of what these people were taught, and the vocabulary level of these 3rd graders surpassed any attorney today in 3rd and 4th grade, and math. And the crazy thing was they had, those old-fashioned chalkboards, because they didn't have notebooks. So they had maybe a chalkboard about maybe the size of an 8 by 12, if that big. And so they couldn't write everything that the teacher put down on the board. And so when they would do math lessons, they had to listen to the math problem and then work it out on the chalkboard and give their answer. And I mean, this was like a 4, 5, 6-step math problem. And it was amazing what I saw. And then I believe I need to look for it. I brought home a sample of the vocabulary list and a sample of the math problems. I'm gonna look for it because I think I hid it. But sometimes, you hide things so well, you hide them from yourself. And I was just amazed at what I saw and comparing it to the education system now and today. So when you made that quote, it goes right in line with what I had, what I thought all those years. And it's on purpose. It's an intentional dumbing down of our population of students to keep them so that we can control them. And we see it playing out today. That's why this COVID agenda is working the way that it is. That's why I'm talking to highly intelligent people with degrees that are high caliber, that are on Wall Street, and that are even attorneys, doctors, that
they're the worst ones.
they are the worst ones. And all they do is keep repeating the same phrases to you. And no matter what you tell them, no matter what you show them, no matter what you could stand on your head and they'll say, no, you were standing on your feet. No, you were standing on your feet. And I'm saying, what is going on? And so between the vaccine, the masks, and what was put in action years ago, even before I was born and you were born, that's what's playing out today. And it's very obvious to me, and I don't understand why it's not obvious to other people.
Well, I was in Flushing, Chinatown last week. We should have done a candid camera routine there, because I was early by a half hour for a real estate closing. And I figured I'll start some trouble while I'm standing in the street.
Okay.
Because I am a real agitator. And so I'm the only one in this whole vast area that's not wearing a mask. Everybody's wearing a mask. And the only Black people that were there are not people that live there. They're workers. They're the cops, or they're truck drivers, whatever. So I figured I'm going to rile them up. So a guy is walking by, big, strong guy with a tank top, big biceps like Hulk Hogan. And I said to him, hey, brother, didn't you ever hear of the Emancipation Proclamation? I said, why are you wearing a mask, especially outdoors? Well, that's what they told me. I said, have you ever heard of the Tuskegee experiment? And he said, no, what's that? I said,
no, he said no.
Yeah, you'd never heard of it. Yeah, most mentioned this too, never heard of it. So he looked on his phone. He says, man, you know what you're talking about. I said, yeah, I do, unfortunately. I said, but you better wake up, because they're playing you and they're using you. Stop allowing yourself to be used. And you know what gets me? Anyone who has ever had a child, and the child sits in the back of the car in a car seat, and you're playing music in the car. Kid, Black, white, Chinese, I don't care what he is. In a few weeks, he'll have memorized the words of every song. It could be a rap song, it could be a pop song, it could be anything. And then their teachers will say that there's something mentally or intellectually wrong with them. Well, if they were stupid, how could they know the words of every song? Obviously, they're capable of thinking if they have the stimulation to think. But the problem is that, take a look at the family. The whole idea of a shotgun wedding started in the Black community. I used to study Black history with a woman named Elizabeth Wright, who was called every name in the book. They called her an Aunt Jemima. They called her an Uncle Tom, because she went into Raleigh-Durham and the history of Raleigh-Durham and Black industry and Black-owned banks and Black insurance companies. And she called out these so-called Black leaders, deliberately kept them down, and cooperated with the white liberals in a, quote, conspiracy, because that's what it is. When people work together, it's a conspiracy, especially when they're doing bad deeds.
Absolutely.
You know, when people call me a conspiracy theorist, I always say, let's see now. You think when a guy with an Italian name winds up under the cement, that was not a conspiracy? The mafia is and was a conspiracy. There are conspiracies everywhere. People, go ahead, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I thought you were finished. No, go ahead.
Yeah, people can work together for good things like you and I are doing, but they can also work together for evil things. I mean, people need to wake up. But this shotgun wedding thing in the Black communities, if you got a girl pregnant not only would her father or brothers or grandfather come and stick a shotgun in your temple, you'd have to take responsibility for what created. You couldn't just walk away.
Right, right.
The bread on the kids' table. Today, we've lost our morality because the Black people had a big church background, a biblical background. They feared God. Today, of course, what they do is they take these Fortune magazine. I wrote about this in a book that I wrote called, the book was called America Does Not Owe You a Living. And in the book, I talk about the Fortune magazine cover, which was all about billionaires who dump their wives when they become very rich, themselves a young hussy. And I said, you know, those billionaires can afford to support 80 kids with 50 different women. But you are making it something to admire by putting that as a front page magazine cover. And some kid who has no money, he thinks that's really cool to have babies that he doesn't take care of. And this is where it starts. We have killed shame in this country. People are not ashamed of anything. I remember Bill Clinton, when he got caught with Monica Lewinsky, he was smoking a cigar and playing the drums in his room and walking around like a peacock or a rooster in a hen house, like he was proud. He wasn't ashamed at all. The brazen arrogance. And this all comes from a lack of fear of God. And I don't want to sound like a holy roller, but the difference between people who believe in facts, who believe in truth, is a belief that there is a higher power above us and that we will be judged ultimately. And that's why we have to do what you're doing and do what's right. So before we end, let's get into the COVID a little bit, because that's how I originally met you.
Yeah.
And I mean, you're fantastic.
Thank you.
If I was a Mormon, I'd make you one of my wives. Unfortunately, I'm not a Mormon, so but I think you're great. But
thank you.
talk about how you got involved in COVID and how you see things.
Oh, wow. How did I get involved with COVID? To be honest with you, I don't even understand how I got involved with COVID. I think it's all God, to be honest with you. I really think it's all God. I mean, I see what's going on. It's quite, it's plain to me. I believe I was talking to a group of people, and Dr. Aaron Lewis, who's a pastor in Connecticut and an advocate, chiropractic advocate, amongst other things. His vitae is large and wide. And he is I believe it was, someone asked him if he knew that's what it was. I believe someone asked him, one of the organizations in Connecticut, freedom organizations in Connecticut, asked him if they knew of an attorney that was standing on the side of freedom. And they especially, I believe, they wanted someone that could help to speak to the Black community, the Black and brown community. And he told them about me and my stance, because he knew how I felt about COVID and what was happening. And they contacted me, and pretty much it just went from there. I spoke one time and that was it. I went from one, I was called from one to speak at one rally to the next rally to the next rally. And then from there, I've just been getting clients based dealing with different COVID issues, and even within the education sector. And I think because of I know because of my stance with education and my experience there, and the way that I see things, and the fact that I understand what's happening. I'm not walking around blinded by this situation. I know that this is completely an agenda. I completely agree with you where I think America has lost its mind. Our government leaders don't understand that their authority is delegated to them by God, and that they are subject to the laws of this state. People have forgotten or not aware, like the gentleman that you spoke to in Flushing, Queens, that we are the government, right? They work for us. We don't work for them. We're not their slaves. right? We have the right, we have certain inalienable rights given to us by God just by the virtue of being human, a human being. And there are no, they don't teach the Constitution, first of all, to children, right? They barely teach it in college. I don't even remember learning about the Constitution in college per se, maybe certain aspects of it.
They don't teach it in law school either.
Exactly. You're right. And by, thank God I had a pretty good constitutional law teacher who was, a Jewish professor who was married to a Black woman who he met when he started working, I believe, with the ACLU or one of the organizations. And so his perspective on things were a lot different. And so I learned a lot through him, but then I went to law school to learn the Constitution, study the Constitution. That was one of my goals. I wanted to learn the Constitution and understand it, because I, like many people, thought that it was this huge, complicated document that had to be dug into it. I'm not simplifying it whereby it's, always easy to read, but it's more understandable than most people think. And we just have to pick up the book and read it. And so one of my goals with speaking on, at these different rallies is to encourage people to open up the Constitution, open it up, read it, read the Bill of Rights, understand your rights and know the laws that govern this country, and understand that we as the citizens of this country have more power than we realize, right? And then I'm challenging people to think, the citizens to think, and to challenge their government leaders, and to stand up for themselves, and to wake up, like you're saying, to wake up. You know what I mean?
I'm getting a lot of phone calls from people who are being threatened of being fired, who are being forced to conform to wearing a mask all day, even though they can't breathe, and they're getting a lot of facial breakouts on their skin. A lot of women have shown me that they got all kinds of rashes from wearing that stupid mask all day. From a legal point of view, in terms of your law practice, what is it that you can do for people who are facing the situation of being told you either take the jab in your arm or you're fired? If they may be a doctor, they may be a nurse, they may be a healthcare worker, they may be a teacher. What is it that you can do for them?
Well, first of all, there's a group of healthcare workers that contacted me, and with regards to the mandates that are being put up, because I'm sure you heard by now what the Department of Health ruled on a few days ago. First of all, the Department of Health does not set the laws. They cannot usurp federal law and the Constitution. And so I say to people, for one, my phrase is you have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, and you have to get uncomfortable with being comfortable. That's it. When you're in a fight, you can't expect to sit and you can't fight from a comfortable position. That doesn't make any sense, right? And so I tell some people you may have to be terminated because your jobs may push back. There are people that are presenting religious exemptions regardless. There are some jobs that are still taking it. But when you look at healthcare workers, more and more hospitals, even the school districts are rejecting their religious exemptions. So I tell people, I've written a couple of letters to employers. I'm actually reviewing one right now for a particular college, a professor at a college. And so I tell them, if the religious exemption is rejected, the next stage is to have an attorney draft a letter and send it to the institution, pretty much stating your rights and threatening a lawsuit. But I also tell potential clients that call me, be prepared when you start this fight to go down the rabbit hole. And so you have to assess how far you're willing to go when you start this fight. If you're not willing to play it out, then don't go down the road, because everyone is not going to fold. There's some jobs that will fold, some employers that will fold and will back up as soon as you send them that letter. There are a lot that won't and will push back and challenge you. And so I tell them, that's the next layer, the religious exemption. Still try it, still see what happens. Because I was speaking to a young adult the other day who found out just recently from her college by going to the campus to meet with a few of the different departments that they have to meet with in order to start school. While she was there, she realized that her school is accepting religious exemption letters, but the overarching belief is that the school is not accepting religious exemption letters because that's what's on their website. That's what's been put out on letters and correspondence from the school. But when she actually went to the school, she found out that they are accepting it up until a certain point. So you have to do the research. You have to find out. You have to try, regardless of what. They may say that to seem as if they're complying with the law, with the mandates, I should say. But at the core of it, a lot of these institutions don't want to end up in a legal battle. Legal battles are very expensive. And it's not just expensive for the plaintiff bringing the lawsuit, it's also expensive for the defendant, right? Because they have to pay an hourly rate to an attorney to go and defend them in court. And so I say you have to fight. The Department of Health, there are a number, the healthcare workers make up one of the largest groups of workers collectively in this country and in the state. Get together with colleagues, get together and find an attorney. If you want to use me, that's fine, but find an attorney that's willing to fight, that's involved in this battle. Someone that's not just in it for a transaction as a business arrangement, but someone who actually believes in this cause. I believe this is not one of those simple transactional situations. You have to find an attorney that is all in with this situation, because most people have a dollar amount by which you can pay them off. And a number of practitioners have co-opted, right? And it's become just this whole transaction. You give me a certain amount of dollars and I'll go in, but I'm not really going to fight for you, right? And then you have those of us that are, head first in. We are there. We believe in this cause. We're fighting it. We're on the freedom trail. And so we'll fight to the end. But people have to be willing to participate in this process. Every attorney, I can't take all these cases and go into court pro bono. That doesn't work. I won't be here after a little while. It's not going to happen. But when you have, I had someone call me the other day and they said, I have 1,000 people that are ready to go to court and sign on with a lawsuit. I said, okay, then collect X amount of dollars per person and let's get this started. And I mean, when I talk about the amount, it was literally like nothing. And they're still deliberating and trying to collect this from people. So I said, well, they're not concerned about their job. They're not concerned about their freedom, because that should not even be it should not even be a further discussion. And so I find that you have some people who want to fight and are willing and are ready to go headstrong. I mean, 3 different groups yesterday, ready to go, ready to push forward. But then you have some people who are just talking and they're wavering and they don't know what to do. I had somebody call my office the other day and they didn't want to take the job. But they said they may just go do it because they can't afford to get fired. And I said, but can you afford to die? Can you afford to get sick? Can you afford to deal with what can potentially come from this, right? And so I can't make a person do what they don't want to do. So I say start with your religious exemption. If you do have a medical issue that prevents you from wearing masks or taking the vaccine, get a medical exemption. Unfortunately, I've heard from a number of people that their medical doctors are not willing to give them medical exemptions, which is interesting, even though they're telling them that to take the vaccine or to wear the mask is detrimental to their health and well-being. That's a little bit bizarre. There is an organization called myfreedoctor.com, and that's Dr. Brian Ardis, who has a number of physicians that are working with him and even attorneys that are helping in this fight and situation. And they may be able to help people who who need medical exemption letters who cannot get it from their own physicians.
At the meeting where I met you, excuse me,
sure.
So Dr. Larry Pilevsky,
yes,
who I was very impressed with.
Yes, Dr. Larry Pilevsky. There's a number. There's Dr. Richard Bartlett. There's a Dr. James Meehan. There's a Dr. Sherwood. There are a number of them out there that are involved in this fight and that are willing to help. Are willing to help people that are dealing with the mandates and things of that nature. But the first layer is is just your inalienable rights. I don't want it. I don't believe in it for whatever reasons. If they push back, use the religious exemption or your medical exemption. If they reject that, then you need a letter from an attorney. And I would say at that point, that's where you send a letter to the institution, to your employer, the school, saying, stating your rights, declaring your rights, and declaring that you are not taking the vaccine and you have this right under the Constitution of the United States, as well as various state laws. And then be prepared to file a lawsuit if that is the case. But don't resign. That is the key. Don't resign. And I know a lot of hospitals are now giving letters to issuing letters to their employers saying that if they don't take the vaccine by a certain date, then they are going to be deemed as opting to resign. That's just language. If you don't resign from an institution, you cannot be deemed as resigning. That's them firing you. That's a termination. That's constructive termination, because they're telling you that you cannot work unless you have the vaccine. So I say don't walk off your job. Let them terminate you if that's the case.
Apparently, they're threatening people that they're going to somehow, if they get fired, and they don't resign, but they get fired for refusing to take the jab, that they won't be able to collect unemployment insurance.
It's all part of the agenda. It's all part of the agenda. That's because they're trying to squeeze people and coerce people. The masks and the vaccines are still under EUA status, emergency use authorization. That's what they're considered right now. They're EUA medical products under the US code 21 USC 360 BBB, 3 of the FDA codes. You have the right to refuse that vaccine or to use the mask. Even the PCR tests, you have the right to refuse. They've recalled the PCR test under a class 1 recall, the most serious recall. The vaccine that they claimed that they licensed the other day by Pfizer, there's none of it in the United States. And if there is such a small amount, it's ridiculous. I was going to be you yesterday. I went to my chiropractor to have an adjustment. And as I walked in, there's a medical, like a small pharmacy, in a medical building, you'll have the pharmacy that can fill all the prescriptions for the doctors. And as I passed, there was a sign saying that they can get the Pfizer vaccine here. And if I had time, I was going to go in there and ask them to show me the bottle, because I wanted to see.
Did that. Yeah, I did it at 6 different drugstores.
And they didn't have it, right?
They're dumber than drones. Oh my God. I asked them to show me the vial, and they said, "Oh, this is FDA approved." I said, "No, it's not. It's not. This is just the same emergency authorized." You know what it is? You ever see the guys in New York City when they have that table with the 3 shells?
Yes.
Take your money.
Monty. Yes.
That's what this is. 3-card Monty
exactly
vaccine.
That's exactly what it is. That's exactly what it is. So, people have to do the research. They have to stand strong, get with people that are like-minded, and push back at the mandates. Don't go into businesses that are requiring vaccine passports. I don't care if you're vaccinated or not, because if we don't push back, we're going to be living in a very, very different country, state, and world. And it's happening faster than we know.
With people who are facing this problem at work or whatever, how do they contact you for legal assistance?
347-386-4604 or TriciaLindsayLaw.com or TriciaLindsayLaw@gmail.com.
Okay, great. Listen, I could talk to you for, but I'm going to have to worry about who removes this video, because then
I know.
I had Dr. Lee Merritt removed. I had Dr. Hatzi, who's also a medical professor at a medical school, removed. So unless you're one of those sellout doctors, which unfortunately is a multiple amount, you're gonna have to get removed, and then you have to find an alternative site to have a platform. This
right.
They call a free country.
No, and I said to someone the other day, there's censorship of our free speech and an attack on our freedoms that's happening, or our freedoms in general happening in this country. And we have to fight. And this, I was so stunned that I did not expect this question from this person. They said, and exactly how is that happening? What are you talking about? That's not happening. And I was baffled. This was on a text group chat, and I didn't respond because I was just thrown, and I was accused the next day of not being able to defend my statement. And I said, it's not that I wasn't able to defend my statement. I was so shocked that you, a person of your intelligence and caliber, asked me that question, and I knew that I didn't have the time nor the energy to to get into that kind of conversation. Because if you had to ask me that, you are so far removed from what's going on in this country more than I thought. And so I just deem it as pretty much a waste of time at this point.
Well, Tricia Lindsay, it was a blessing to encounter you. I hope we will remain in touch, and hopefully I've made a new friend.
I'm thinking the same thing as well.
Because I'm generally not the most popular guy in the world.
You know what? The popular people are the ones that's going with the status quo. I'm not worried about popularity in that respect, right? So yeah, that's fine.
My father used to say, if everybody loves you, God will hate you. And if everybody loves you, God will love you.
And I love that, because I always told students when I taught them, if everyone loves you, then you're doing something wrong. You're not making waves. You're not making waves.
Well, you keep swimming and making those waves.
Thank you. Thank you. You as well.
And hopefully we can surf those waves together.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely.
Thank you. God bless you.
Thank you for the opportunity, and I'm honored. Appreciate it.
I'm honored. The honor's with me.
Thank you. Have a great one.
You too.